So I'll just start with an overview of our farm and where we are. So we're about 5k, 10k south of Horsham. We're a mixed farming enterprise, so we're running 75% cropping and 25% is a self-replacing merino flock. 2,500 breeding ewes, 1,000 weaner ewes, so replacements, and 1,000 1.5-year-old wethers. So we run them fairly hard. The crops, we have a very broad rotation. We're quite lucky where we are. We can do wheat, barley, canola, oat and hay, beans, vetch. We can grow most things. I don't like lentils. So our soil type's heavy clay, and we also have lighter, sandier loams, which is where we tend to run the sheep, just because we run into a lot more weed issues on those lighter, sandier soils. We have a lot less chemicals we can use, so we just put sheep there because they eat all those weeds. We've been no-till for about 20 years, I'd say, and we've sort of just come over to controlled traffic. We've sort of just lined up all our wheel marks finally. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about cropping. I think Tim covered the CTF stuff pretty good there. I'm going to talk about sheep. So I'm not sure how many people here actually have sheep, but these are some of the things we look at in our sheep enterprise to control the weeds. Containment areas are a really big one for us, and we've sort of been using them. We started in probably 2010. 2014 and 15 were pretty bad years here, and that's when we really took off with them. And we can now pretty much put all our sheep into containment if we have to. I'll talk a bit more on containment later. Clean feed sources. So when we're feeding sheep out in the paddocks, it's always tempting just to grab the silo and off you go. But we tend to try and grab clean grain and also feed them in areas that we're not cropping. So if you've got a drain or a dam bank or something like that. We also look where the sheep come from and where are the sheep going. That's just internally because we are a self-replacing flock. So we look at Bathurst burr as a classic example of sheep carrying weeds. So we tend to try and shear the sheep before we move them to a block without Bathurst burr, or we just don't move them there in the first place. The other big one with sheep is don't overgraze, because a lot of the weed issues we get with sheep are when we overgraze a paddock. So your barley, they'll eat all the good stuff first, your clover, ryegrass is good in our operation sometimes, and they'll just leave the barley grass. So, once again, that comes back to those containment areas, which we find are just so useful now for controlling these weeds. We do hay, and so sheep also allow us to use a few different techniques to control the weeds within our cropping program. So we do hay and silage, and when I say hay, I probably mean bad quality hay, because we do export hay, and that's good quality. With sheep, it allows us to make hay out of paddocks that you probably wouldn't make it for. You couldn't sell it to anybody else. It's full of weeds, it's full of rubbish, but we've got containment areas that are quite small that we can feed that hay out in and not have to worry about those weeds. So that's a big one for us. And also silage. We make pit silage, not baled silage. And we find that one's probably one of our best techniques for cleaning up a paddock. You cut probably 4 weeks in front of normal hay. You can let it regrow, so you can keep your ground cover. You cut very early, so you can let that regrow a little bit, then spray it out after you've done that, so you can, and also silage is really good because you only need 3 good days of good weather. You don't need 14. So, we use the sheep instead of a double knock in some situations. I pretty much don't do double knocks over summer because sheep eat nearly every chemical resistant weed except for broom grass. They hate it. And also you can graze cover crops and brown manure crops. So a lot of people are doing these now, and we feel it's we've gone to all that effort of growing all that biomass, we may as well convert that into some meat or some wool. Now, just a bit of a note, grain and graze is a big thing at the moment, and we've got a group around south of the Wimmera, a Best Wool, Best Land group, and we've done a lot of stuff on this grain and graze within our farming group. And Some people have still persisted with it, but we've sort of found that doing the grain and graze, there's too big a yield penalty. You can't predict what the spring's going to do. And we've just sort of gone away from that. We either graze it fully or we don't graze it at all, because it also opens up the canopy. You've got a nice big crop that you've sown early for sheep feed. You graze it, it opens up the canopy, and bang, all your ryegrass and weeds come through that again. So broadleafs aren't an issue because we can spray them out, but in terms of ryegrass, which is probably one of our bigger weeds, it's too much of a hassle. So I just put together a few pros and cons that we have for sheep. I've probably already covered a few of them just before. So yeah, once again, sheep will eat most chemically resistant weeds: radish, ryegrass, fleabane. I was a bit surprised on the fleabane because I've never actually had it before until a couple of years back, and I got a lease block and I put the sheep in there while I was spraying other paddocks and come back and there was no fleabane. So they will eat fleabane, which is good. Whip thistle, which is becoming a bit more of a problem now, having to come back and do the double knock. They definitely eat whip thistle. You're able to utilise your cover crops better and generate a bit more cash flow off those. You can still keep, with your containment yards and stuff like that, if you're not running sheep all the time and you're buying them in, you can graze your cover crops when they run out and you've still got ground cover there. You can spray them out and put your sheep in the containment. So yeah, there's no reason to overgraze anymore. Also, it gives you that flexibility with crops that have something happen to them environmental through the year. So drought, flood, weed infestations, or frost. So it sort of makes those decisions really easy for us that, if we get a paddock that's flooded out, we know it's not going to yield. We can go, righto, let's clean up some pasture paddocks, whack them in that paddock, graze it all off. It delays all the weed seed set for your ryegrass and all the other weeds. And we can clean up 2 paddocks that way. We clean up our pasture paddock and we can clean up a future problem. Diversifies your income streams, which is quite good these days. Double knocks for the summer, we've already gone over that. Converting weeds to kilos is I think a really big one, because anything you can put a kilo on your farm, just like yield, you're going to make money out of. So don't waste anything you grow, even if it is a weed. You can reduce stubble loads too. Sheep will eat a fair bit of stubble. So yeah, I'm in a time machine. People trying to convert me to disc, but we'll see. Less risk than hay as well, and grain with sheep. You probably don't get as big a return, but there's definitely a lot less risk than hay and grain. They're not going to get ruined overnight. Sheep die slowly. So some of the cons, they do carry weeds in their wool and faeces. So yeah, that's a big one. When I was saying before, is we pretty much only buy in rams, but when we buy in a ram, we shear it, leave it in the shed for a week, feed it with feed that we know is clean. So then you've got a fully decontaminated animal. Compaction, they will compact the soil no matter what you do. There's no way to get around that. But once again, containment does help with that, in that you don't have to overgraze. And same with the ground cover. It can be compromised if they're not managed properly. So another con with sheep is they're not set and forget. You can't just put them in the paddock and say there's enough feed there for 2 months. I'll see you in 2 months, because something will go wrong. High cost to buy in at the moment. That's probably a fairly big con, I'd say, because they're pretty expensive. Shearing can be one, getting shearers. I've got a question mark next to that, because there are a lot of breeds now that you've got your Dorpers and Australian Whites and sheep like that don't actually need shearing, so there are a lot less maintenance with them. You do have to have extra infrastructure. I know, talking one of the speakers before, saying that there's no sheep in the area, and I dare say the fences have all deteriorated. So yeah, that's one thing you have to look at. And inter-row sowing can be a bit harder, we've found, especially since we've gone to the controlled traffic. We have to make sure we're 300 millimetre spacings. All our stubble has to be cut 300 millimetres high, or else it'll lodge on each other when the sheep walk through. And then, once it gets wet, we're in big trouble. So with the containment yards, I can't stress enough now, like, if you haven't been in sheep for 10 or 15 years, containment yards have just made it so much easier to use. It's such a simple concept. Everybody that has sheep, I believe, should have some form of containment to to put their sheep in. So they can be as expensive or as cheap as you want. 2 to 5 square metres per sheep. I'd probably go closer to 5. If you get the right density in there, there's hardly any dust. Even on a stinking northerly breeze, there'll be no dust in there. And they'll be quite comfortable at 5 to the square metre. When you're looking at water, look at the flow, not the pressure. You don't need to squirt the water from one side of the pen to the other. You just need to be able to fill that trough up as quick as you can. So, yeah, just make sure you look at the flow. So 2-inch pipes, 1.5 inches, instead of the smaller ones and high pressure. Food and water far away from each other as possible. Saves you having to clean the troughs out every day. Eat at one end, drink at the other. Shade, it's a really important one. If you can put shade in there, we've got some that don't have shade and we tend to not put them there for too long if we can avoid it. So when you're feeding out stuff in these containment yards, we've got everything from self-feeders, we've got old recycled drain pipes you can buy. We've cut them in half with a chainsaw and you can fill them up with feed. And in our bigger ones where we can have up to 600 sheep in them, we just feed it straight onto the ground. Yeah, like I said, they can be as complicated or as simple as you like. You've got to get the nutrition right though, and it's a really important one. And if you don't have the knowledge, there's a lot of people there that do. So yeah, when you're feeding them, make sure you get that right. We mix up our own minerals and salts to go in there, but yeah, if you're not sure what you're doing there, definitely make sure you get them the right diet. 6-in-1 vaccines and a drench before they go in there because it's a high disease environment. Saves you a lot of hassles, and once you do that, you'll take care of nearly all the issues there, I'd say. So the best thing about the containment is what you can feed in them. So screenings, you've got all that waste from all the weeds you've cleaned out of your nice clean seed. Perfect to put in a containment area through a self-feeder or some method like that. You've got a small area where you can clean, where you have to spray. So, I mean, we put close to 1,000 sheep on probably 1 hectare, maybe, I think, something like that. So it's pretty easy to spray that out. I actually use the self-propelled and drive over the top down the laneway. Canola hay, bought-in grain, silage, all those things are a lot easier to feed in containment yards than out in your own paddock. I've already talked about the small area to contain the weeds in. You can feed a lot less grain and gain more weight on your ewes and also get better conception for better lambs. So you're feeding your weeds out to them, making money out of your weeds and making more lambs. So they've also got a lot of multiple uses. So you've got fire protection, lamb feedlot, shearing, joining ewes. I think when you come out to our place on Thursday, we're currently weaning lambs and I've got nowhere to put them, so they're now in containment. They really do help the ground cover on your pastures and your cropping paddocks. So creating a green wedge as well. So the biggest thing we use at containment yards are in autumn. So we'll graze all our cereal stubbles over summer. When the feed runs out, instead of going, geez, where am I going to put them on a paddock and bear it out, they all go into containment. And once they're in there, they pretty much stay there until the day they have to lamb. If that's the way the season goes, they'll stay in there until the first lamb starts to drop. That way we get a nice green wedge of feed, all those pastures you've sown or crops or brown manure crops. It allows them to get away before you graze them, get a good amount of biomass out there. So when you put the sheep on there, they don't just go eat all the good stuff, leave the weeds, and then you're just left with weeds. So the other one is mental health with sheep. Nothing worse than going out and feeding sheep in a drought and having to drive around your whole farm with a sheep feeder in the dust and watch your paddocks blow away. You can feed all your sheep in, a couple of hours. Like we feed all our sheep, I think 2015 was the last time I had them all in containment, and there was, I think with lambs, and if you counted the actual heads, I think we would have had 6,500 head, and it took me about 2.5 hours to feed the whole lot. And I didn't even have to feed all of those every day because I had self-feeders there too. So, yeah, for mental health and sheep, I'd definitely recommend containment yards. And keep an eye out for government funding because there's a lot of funding available for containment yards and sheep and stuff like that at the moment. I think I've got 2 of my containment yards built through funding from the government. So just keep an eye out for those when they come up. So this is a picture of one of our containment yards that we haven't, this is sort of an emergency one. These ones here are about 50 metres by 50 metres. We get about 300 sheep in one of those, which seems like a lot, but once you put them in there, it actually doesn't look that full. You can see the water lines there, 1.5 inch lines going into those troughs just for that water flow. This is a picture this year. This is, don't know what sheep they are. I think that's after preg testing. They're all split up into twins and singles, and so we put all our twin ewes, because there wasn't much feed over summer, all our twin ewes got put in containment and got fed all the screenings and all the canola hay we made. So, and this is the silage that we make. So I don't do anything special with it. It's just pretty much get a grader out, grade a nice flat looking spot and put a tarp over it. So it's pretty cheap. It's about, I think it's going to cost you about $10 a cubic metre to make pit silage. We piggyback off pretty much the only dairy farmer in the Windrow and steal his silage contractor while he's here. And this is some of the equipment we use to feed those sheep. There's our silage wagon, which we can mix up all the different stuff in, and just a sheep feeder with the scales on it there to get an accurate reading. So these are some of the other things we use, are probably the same as what Tim's saying, except for we do the narrow windrow burning. We only do canola. I've tried all the other ones, but I seem to just burn the whole paddock when I do cereals, so I stopped doing that. Narrow wind burning of the canola seems to burn even if it gets a rain. I'm not sure if it's the structure of the stems or the oil in the seed, but we seem to get a burn right down to the ground every single time. So we just sort of do it as a matter of fact now that the canola gets windrowed every year. Our windrow contractor has a sprayer under the cutter bar, and he's also just got a 40-foot front, so we're going to finally line the windrower up with the controlled traffic too now. We spray top all the legumes, usually just use gramoxone on those. So multiple chemical groups. We do resistance testings. We use the sheep to graze paddocks that are sown to Moby barley and clover. We find they work really well together, growing those two varieties. And then we double knock them. So I'll graze them off pretty much to ground level, take the sheep out, let it grow back to probably maybe about 4 inches, 5 inches high, and then double knock it. And that does a really good job. We do hay of all types, so we do oat and hay as well. And we also do pasture hay. Because we've got that sheep, we don't have to find a market for that hay, which is really handy sometimes. And silage, which is probably the ultimate in cleaning up your paddock, because you're cutting so early, you cut low, and yeah, it's fantastic. And we also used a seed destructor. We used the Harrington seed destructor last year. Yeah, that was, as far as I can tell, it looks no different to the paddock I cut for hay. So we cut half the paddock for hay and half the paddock with the seed destructor, and I can't tell the difference yet, so I'm assuming it worked. Yeah. This is a paddock last year, so it was a fairly tight year last year, and this is a paddock of early sown Moby barley. This was taken in August last year, I'm pretty sure. And yeah, you can see there, it really does grow, Moby barley, so yeah. And that's just another picture of I tried some sub-zero brassica in with the Moby this year, but I think I'll stick to the clover because the Moby seems to choke out the canola too quick, so yeah. And yeah, look forward to everybody on Thursday coming to visit.